Hello and welcome everyone to our final podcast on day 37 of our Community Ecology section. This will be only about an 8-9 minute podcast, and in this podcast we're going to talk about ecological succession and how that can be divided up into primary or secondary succession and some of the kinds of colonizing organisms that will allow primary and secondary succession to occur. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, I want to begin our discussion of succession by looking at this volcano that's about to erupt. And as you look on this island here, you see a fairly rich and green forest area here. But as this volcano erupts, you can see the lava coming out in this burst of flames. And you can see the lava, as I said, coming down here, streaming down here. See some of it coming over here. And what this is doing is all that vegetation, all that life, all of it around it is now going to be destroyed. And as we think about that, after that lava has come out and destroyed all life and removed all the soil that is there too, how do we have growth in that area occur once again? And so here's a picture. This is a different volcano, but we can see that there was a volcano back here. It erupted and it destroyed all this area here. But now you can see we're starting to get some life coming here, even though the lava removed even the soil and of course all the life. But we're starting to get a little bit of growth. So the question I have here is, how long does it take to get from that video I just showed you to this point? Well, it takes about 8 years. It takes about 8 years just to get this little minimal growth coming. So these kinds of large catastrophic changes to the community structure really has a long-lasting effect. But the good thing is they do begin to grow back over time. Now going from this picture here to this picture here, how long does that take? You can see in this picture we're starting to see some trees starting to form, maybe not like the big trees that we're used to seeing in a forest, but certainly more life looks like it's appearing here as opposed to this top picture. And this picture here, between this one and here, it's been about 13 years. So all in all, from the time the volcano erupted to what we see here, it's 21 years. So it takes quite a while for us to grow. And it's not even reached what we would call the pinnacle, or as the term I'm going to say in a moment, the climax community. So the question is, how do we get to this point here, and then how do we get to this point here? Well, let's take a few steps back and talk about some terms. What we see in those two pictures, going from no life to life, and then various levels of plant structures, we call this succession. As you begin to grow from from no life essentially here to beginning to form some mosses and some other herbs, as well as maybe some bacterial communities. You can't see them here, but they're there, all the way through forming smaller shrubs and smaller plants to these larger trees, and then finally to these climax communities where we have the very large trees. In order to get this point right here, going from here to here over this long period of time, we call this succession. So let's look at some of the terms we might use in association with succession. We know that these communities that we've talked about throughout these podcasts can remain stable over a very long period of time. And remember, we said the more diverse the community is, the more stable it will be. But even the most stable community at some points will experience great changes, either because of a forest fire, it could be because of a volcano like we talked about at the very beginning of this podcast. So it can be natural like the fire or the volcano, or unfortunately sometimes they can be caused by humans. Whenever this happens, it takes a while, but they are gradually reestablished, as we were talking about in the last two slides. And we call this succession, the reestablishment of these plant communities. We can think of succession as being either primary or secondary. Primary is when there is no life at all. Whatever damaged the community was so severe that it removed all soil and all life. Lava flows are certainly fall in this category as volcanic islands when the whole volcano erupts. We also have some areas that are just rock, and over time we can start to grow various kinds of communities on those rocks. And this would be primary succession. Secondary succession is when the damage is not as severe, meaning there's still some life there, not much. It's going to be some of the very smaller kinds of plant lives, like your mosses might be present. And what's important is that we have soil present. We see this when we have abandoned farmlands and forest fires. Usually a forest fire isn't going to destroy all life, and it certainly doesn't remove all the soil. As long as you have some soil there, we would still call this an example of secondary succession. I should also say that you can think of this as kind of this sliding scale, where if you started off with a primary succession, it would grow to a point where this secondary succession is beginning. So you can kind of think of secondary succession as giving this community a head start over primary. Whatever's growing in the secondary succession examples will eventually be found even with a primary succession. It just gives a head start because it gives you this soil. That soil is really important in establishing a more vigorous and robust life within that community. Now when you think about this, going from only rock around with no soil to this vibrant forest community, what kinds of life are going to first inhabit it, and what kinds of life are going to inhabit it later on? Okay, so what's going to first colonize these areas are what we call early colonizers. These early colonizers are good dispersers, meaning they can spread pretty fast. They are, however, not very good competitors. When these later colonizers come in, these early colonizers are going to be completely wiped out. But we need them to start things off. If you remember from population ecology discussions, these typically are very opportunistic and are selected species. So our smaller species, the ones that grow fast, produce lots of progeny. Now, after some amount of time has passed, we start getting more of our equilibrium and K-selected species coming along. These are larger animals, or plants, I should say. They're typically quite good competitors. They're going to outcompete these early colonizers. So you can think of like these early colonizers as being, maybe some shrubs growing here on the ground. Well, let's draw the ground first. There might be these shrubs growing on the ground. You might, on the rocks that are here, you may see some moss growing on it. But as these late colonizers come in, these may be your very large trees. And they're going to be numerous. I'm just drawing one here. Coincidentally, I guess it almost looks like an atom bomb going off, but it's supposed to be a tree, I promise you. Because it's so large, it's going to outcompete these smaller organisms. It's going to block the sunlight out. And so now these smaller plants aren't going to do as well because these larger and later colonizers sort of take over. And that's really all we need to know about this objective. How do we get from that exploding volcano to here? We need those early colonizers coming in here to go from this primary succession to this area here that might be more of a secondary succession appearance. And then finally growing towards that climax community as our equilibrium species begin to dominate this area here. Remember, up here we're going to still see more of our opportunistic, R-selected species in this area here. But then we get into these equilibrium K-selected species here. In this particular example, it takes about 20-25 years to do this. And it's still going, right? This is still not reached the pinnacle of success at this area. And again, if the volcano goes off again, it'll just repeat this whole thing all over again. Alright, if you have any questions about this, please let us know, and we'll do our best to answer any questions you may have. Good luck, and we'll see you in class. Bye.